Thank you very much for joining us right here on the India Development Debate this evening on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath and we're putting the spotlight on Davos, the World Economic Forum, the 48th Summit. And it's going to be a big year for India in the cool climes of Davos. Narendra Modi will be making his grand debut in Davos this year. This is the 48th Summit of the World Economic Forum. He will be the first Indian Prime Minister to be visiting Davos. Of course, other than his predecessors, Mr. Rao, Narasimha Rao previously and H.D. Devegowda, he is the first Prime Minister who goes there with a full majority. Remember, he goes there with a huge political mandate and of course that will work in India's favor. We're given to understand that he will make a big pitch as far as driving investments in India is concerned. We're also given to understand that he will be talking about the reforms that have been undertaken by the Modi government. At this stage, GST and IBC and NCLT and all of that is one big reform that has been taken. The stage will be set for the other big ticket reforms, and we'll have to wait and watch what India does. In fact, a lot of global observers believe that in a summit where there are 3,000 delegates and some of the most prominent and the most powerful men and women on this planet who congregate at Davos, it will be a good day for India to try and wrest some of the globalization muscle from China's ambitious globalization plans. Of course, this isn't just Mr. Modi who's going to debut at Davos. This year, Chetna Sinha of Mandeshi Foundation is one of the 7 all-women panel at the World Economic Forum. It is a great pride for our country. India at Davos is the focus of the India Development Debate this evening. And joining us right here is a stellar panel. Chetna Sinha, co-chair of that all-women 7-member panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos, joins us right here on the show tonight. Hemant Kanoria, CMD Shrey Infrastructure, Suman Sinha, Chairman and CEO Renew Power Ventures India, Ratul Puri, Chairman Hindustan Power Projects India, and Sadanand Dhume, Western Fellow, American Enterprise Institute. So thank you each one of you for being with us. I can't thank you enough for taking time out and talking to us about Davos and what this visit from the Prime Minister will really mean. Hemant Kanoria, I'm going to begin with you, and the first question has to be about the pitch that the Prime Minister is expected to make at Davos. What do you believe he's going to pitch at Davos? This is a congregation of not just corporates or politicians, 3,000 delegates from all across the world, 119 economies. These are the most powerful and the most influential men and women. Some of the most influential opinion makers are all there. What will be his pitch to the global audience at Davos, and how significant is the Prime Minister's visit, given the fact that he is the first Prime Minister of India in the last 21 years to be there in the cool climes of the beautiful ski resort?
No, I think that this visit is going to be very significant because Mr. Modi has been going around meeting various people and investors and industrialists, inviting them from all over the world to invest in India. And a lot of things are being done in India on the structural changes because of the GST, IBC and many other reforms which has been brought in. So that needs to be exposed and told to the people. And this is the best platform because you have almost all the leaders, you have the largest number of CEOs from various organizations all over the world being present here. So at Davos. So I think that this is the opportune time and also the opportune place to be in a position to speak about what India brings to the table. And in the global arena today, India is definitely the rising star because there is a huge population, there is a young population, there are a lot of ambitious people, and there are a lot of opportunities which is there in the country. So I think that this is the right time for the Prime Minister to visit and to be in a position to speak out and tell the people at large that what changes have been brought out in the country and what are the opportunities which are there in store for them in the future.
All right, I know some of you will be headed to Davos, and Chetna Sinha, of course, is a co-chair, and I'll come to her in just a bit. But Suman Sinha, you wrote a brilliant piece in the Economic Times about the Prime Minister needing to be the Chief Marketing Officer of India. I'll come to that in just a bit. But this year's Davos is very different from the previous years, and the Prime Minister will be there. There is a lot of, inquiries being made. There is a lot of excitement in the air, so to say, in New Delhi about the Prime Minister being there. It's a big delegation, 6 ministers, 2 chief ministers, many CEOs like yourselves. What is it that the world wants Mr. Modi to say at Davos, and what is he prepared to tell them really?
Well, Supriya, those are questions that I really can't answer because obviously I'm not a mind reader. I can only tell you what he ought to say and what the world would want to hear. And a lot of that Hemant has already talked about. I think that, Mr. Modi has now been in power in India for the last almost 4 years, or 3.5 years certainly. And by all accounts, would likely be there for another several years running the country. And so he's a very central figure in how India is perceived, what our future policies are going to be. And I think, therefore, the world would like to hear from him what he's thinking along a number of these issues. What is he thinking, for example, about further improving the ease of doing business? What is he thinking about the privatization of various public sector enterprises? What is he thinking about further liberalizing foreign direct investment? What is he thinking about improving different sectors in the country? And how does he think about about foreign investments in general? I think those are some of the things that the world would want to hear. And they'd want to hear what his agenda might be for the next many years. He's talked about a new India by the year 2022. What does that mean? How is he going to get there? And what that might mean for the investment climate in India, particularly for foreign investors going forward. That's what really foreign investors would want to hear and want to listen to from Mr. Modi. What Mr. Modi might want to say, on the other hand, is very different. It's hard to forecast accurately, but hopefully he's going all the way to Davos to talk about some of these issues. And I think beyond that, there is one other agenda that he might very well have, which is to, in some senses, position himself among the pantheon of global leaders. We all know that the US at some level is withdrawing from the global world order, which itself it had created. And I'm sure Sadanand will talk a little bit more about those kinds of issues. China, Xi Jinping was in Davos last year and made a very strong pitch to take on the role that the US is leaving behind. But of course, there's a lot of skepticism about whether, in fact, China has the real desire to do so, and do they have the philosophical intent and the mindset to do so. And so, in some senses, we are heading into a world order which is much more multipolar than it has been so far. And India is a rising power. Mr. Modi, as you mentioned, has a unique mandate which has not been had by anybody in India for the last 30 years. And so what does he want to do with that mandate? And I think that's something that he would like to, use the opportunity of to position himself.
No, absolutely. In fact, I think the fact that, he is the best ever ranked Indian Prime Minister on this Gallup International Association just after Merkel and Macron, I think it has a lot to say about his own popularity. But we'll come to all of that and some of the other points that you raised about globalization and, that receding space that US is creating. Can India claim stake to that in just a bit? And I'd like to take that question with Sadanand. But before I do that, a very quick question to Ratul Puri, who's stuck in traffic and couldn't join us on the cameras here. But Ratul, you've been a Davos veteran of sorts. You go there every year, and each year there is a different theme. Each year there is a different excitement. But this year it's all about Mr. Modi. I know it was about Make in India when he had just come to power, and that lion was all over the place, and there was huge branding. But this year it's unprecedented because it is Mr. Modi himself who's going to be going there. This is a great honor as far as the plenary keynote and all of that is concerned. How do you believe this changes things for India per se?
Be there live in person, and thanks for having me on your show. I think this is certainly a milestone event. I've been going to Davos now for about 10 years, and seeing both India's presence at Davos this year, seeing the number of participants, and seeing the spotlight position India is getting, actually does make me feel, it instills a sense of pride in me. And I think there's no one better than Mr. Modi to project India and present India, not just from an economic perspective. And I think there are obviously many positive economic achievements that we've had in the last couple of years. There are also many structural reforms that we've carried out. But I think it goes beyond that. I think if you look at the ability of India and Mr. Modi to project the other areas where India has had has had many achievements. There have been many more programs beyond economic programs. So I think when we look at when we look at Davos, last year was all about China, and it was all about the plenary address that the premier gave last year, and there he obviously tried to position himself, as the new global leader, in
Right.
U.S. world. I think.
Right.
This is an opportunity for India to present itself, and I think the government is seized of that, and
Right.
I think that's going to change India's positioning globally, because you have
Right.
events you will have.
All right. Ratul Puri, just hold your thoughts there, because I'm going to take this discussion straight to Chetna Sinha, and who has not just the great honor of representing India, in a year when the Prime Minister is there and all of that, but she's also one of the co-chairs of the World Economic Forum, and congratulations on that, Ms. Sinha, and you do mark a different beginning at the Davos, which is obviously supposed to be all men-dominated. So I'm glad, and it's always good to see female power. It's always good to see people like you rising. But what does Davos mean to you this year, especially concerning that the Prime Minister is going to be there himself, and of course your own achievement notwithstanding?
Thanks, Supriya, for having me at the show. And being a co-chair, I do one thing which I feel very important about Davos is that this year the theme is that creating and shaping future with the fractured world. And I am representing Davos as a co-chair, not as a woman, but also as a voices of the fractured world at the Davos. And when I say that, what I mean is that these forums, global forums like Davos, which talk about investment, which talk about where the corporate world come, where you get all the CEOs and the head of the states. But this year's special thing is, I do think one is that the theme is about the fractured world, and I see myself bringing the voices of fractured world, because I've worked for 20 years with and set up the homegrown women's bank, Mandeshi Bank, and I do see that when you go to such forum, you talk about these women entrepreneurs, or so I see Davos as particularly India, when we had a global entrepreneurship summit, which we just had last month, and now extension to that, our Prime Minister is visiting Davos. So I do think that Prime Minister is representing Davos after 20 years, and this is a very important thing. But at the same time, India is a country of entrepreneurs, and country of entrepreneurs, as Prime Minister has always said.
Just hold your thoughts there, Ms. Mandeshi, and we'll get the mic ready with you. But I'm going to take this across to Sadanand Dume. And Sadanand, you've tracked these kind of visits for very long. You obviously analyze them deeply. I'm going to be asking you to be candid. What do you make about this visit? There is so much of exuberance around it. There is so much that is being written about him being the first Prime Minister in the last 20 years. Are you going to be a skeptic and say, it's all right, I mean, let's not create a big deal out of this? Or do you really believe this is a big moment, this is important? Because given the world economic order, this is perhaps, many people, at least in New Delhi, insist, this is perhaps some sort of validation of how important India is in the scheme of things.
Well, Sumant may not be a mind reader, but you are, because I am certainly going to be a skeptic. And let me just point out two things. The first is that this is, at the end of the day, simply a conference. There have been other occasions where India has been prominent at the conference, and there have been occasions where India has been less prominent. Of course, it's a reasonably well-known conference, but at the end of the day, it's a conference. The second point, which is the elephant in the room, the orange elephant in the room, if you will, is that in many ways, Trump deciding to show up for Davos really turns the spotlight on Trump. Now, if Trump were not there, then this may have been framed in terms of 2017 Xi Jinping, 2018 Narendra Modi, the leader of another very large Asian economy. Now you have Trump there, so the real sort of the central takeaway from this for the world really revolves around the debate that's been going on in the United States, the battle between the so-called globalists and the nationalists. And what people will be looking at most carefully is what kind of tone does Trump strike? Does Trump say that the old America that many people had grown to rely upon is still there, that America is not turning into Fortress America, it's not putting up the walls? Or are we going to see Trump double down on his nationalist message, America first, and so on? So that is going to be the most profound takeaway. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister and his handlers must be at least a little bit disappointed that Trump has decided to show up. Now, I just sort of like leave it with you, leave this with those two big framing questions, and then I'm happy to sort of get more into this about why I'm a little bit skeptical.
Absolutely. There's no denying that if it wasn't Trump, then it would have been a Modi show all throughout. But yes, the opening plenary by Modi and the closing keynote by Trump does steal away some bit of the thunder. But Suman Sinha, we'll ask you a quick question and then I will take it across to Hemant Kanoria to get his views as well. Now, a lot of people believe that, America's antipathy to globalization is what put Xi Jinping out there at Davos last year to talk about how willing China was to embrace globalization, something that India would want to temper, something that India would want to arrest, this Chinese ambition of embracing globalization, because India has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of globalization itself. Given this scenario and given the realities, this whole economic nationalism that one has seen, the pitch that Mr. Modi is likely to make is we are open to business and we're going to lay out a red carpet if you want to invest in our country. Do you believe that's going to be doable? Do you believe, given that there has been an antipathy of sorts from the US in globalization, this is India's chance to stake claim?
Supriya, it is obviously India's chance. I mean, India has many chances. This is obviously one of those which is, viewed by more people than perhaps other pronouncements might be. But I think the important thing is, obviously, one thing what Mr. Modi says, it's another in terms of what he actually does. And I think the best way to get to encourage foreign investments into the country is actually change your own rules, make it easier actually to do business in the country. And I think that's really what he needs to focus on. So if the announcements of, if in his speech he's able to come up with new policies, new incentives, a new philosophy, which are sweeping, which are new, I think that'll get people to sit up and take notice. But if it's just a rehash of all the things that have already happened, which people already have baked into their thought process, then it won't be such a great speech, or such a, it won't be as well received. So I think, Mr. Modi and his advisors really have to do a fair bit of thinking here to come out with something that is interesting, which is new, which is novel, and which is going to excite people. And I think that is, he'll have to announce something, which is in tune with what the world wants to hear, which is not economic nationalism, which is maybe a commitment to freer markets, which is perhaps a commitment to global multilateral agreements like the climate change agreement. Those kinds of things are things I think that the world would want to hear. And along with, of course, very significant domestic changes. And for example, a different philosophy on ownership of public sector banks, for example, or a different philosophy on public sector ownership in general. Might be something that might excite people and cause people to think that here is a fundamental shift that is happening. India is opening up in a way that it has never opened up before, and therefore this is something that is a seminal change, and therefore we must take part in this exciting story. I think that's the kind of thing Mr. Modi will have to talk about and market, rather than just go back again and talk about GST, demonetization, some incremental changes in FDI and so on. So it'll have to be something new that captures people's imagination.
All right, it has to be something new that captures people's imagination. But let me bring this to you, Hemant Kanoria. And the larger point that we are talking about is globalization and how the developed world, especially the US, wants to turn away from this. At least the talk, at least the chatter is that. And China has already made this big pitch last year. How does India embrace and reposition itself and counter China's rising global aspirations?
No, my suggestion would be to see that, India has definitely the advantages which China may not have or the US may not have. So I think that it would be much better to focus on the advantages which are there in India and also because the frame of mind of the government today, and which has been there for quite some time, is that we would be very happy to play as a major player in the global arena, and globalization is something which we have already embraced and we are not going back on it. But definitely wherever we have to be selective in looking at the industries domestically and seeing that we safeguard their interests, we have to do that. So therefore there has to be a balance which has to be there, that free trade is very good, but at the same time we cannot let everything loose and in the air, that it cannot just be a jungle raj. So therefore I think that there has to be a structured free trade, there has to be a structured globalization embracement which we have done, and that is the path which I think that India has already taken and should continue to go forward on.
Sadanand, are you surprised that Indian industry is also already making a pitch for structured free trade, and let's not open our markets to just everybody who wants to come in? There is already this, if I may say, veiled protectionist pitch being made by Indian industry that will be present there at Davos.
Well, not even very well veiled at that. But I want to come back to to the point that Sumant raised, and I absolutely agree with him that if you want to make a splash, you want to sort of get to the core of the question. And the fact remains that in 2018, people do not have the same enthusiasm for Modi that they did in 2014. In 2014, he was seen as this potentially revolutionary economic figure who would completely upend the old ways of doing business, would bring in a much greater role for the market, and so on. In 2018, I think it's fair to say that most of us are at least a little bit jaded. I'm not saying that he doesn't have his proponents, obviously he does. And so the question is, can he kind of kickstart that engine again in 2018 with an international audience leading into an election year? And I think the answer is no. And if I had to bet on what the takeaways of this are going to be, I would say that Mr. Modi is going to Davos with an eye on a domestic audience. He's going to go out there and he's going to lay out his greatest hits, GST, bankruptcy, greatest hits, some of which are not hits, like demonetization, and sort of, and bask in the kind of normal adulation you get in these kind of things with, the sort of corporate sycophants and so on. And that is going to be the takeaway. Modi went to Davos, all these guys in suits cheered him, and he came back. I'd be very, very surprised if any Indian Prime Minister, not just Modi, heading into an election, is going to suddenly come out and espouse these deep structural reforms that he's avoided for 4 years.
I just think you hit the nail on its head when you say that if Modi is being described by many as, at best, as being an incrementalist reformist. He is not somebody who likes privatization. I was quite surprised that they decided to privatize Air India to begin with. Let's see if that happens or not. But Chetna Sinha, before I go across to the others and ask about the real investment, let me ask you also this question. Who is Mr. Modi going to cater to at Davos? Is he catering to the world's elites that gather there, or is he actually keeping an eye on Indian audience while he makes that big pitch at the World Economic Forum?
So actually, I would say, I would expect that the recent report, if you read McKinsey report, which says that, the India has done really well of getting the impact investment, and the financial market is quite robust in India to get impact investment with that report. And on one side, you also see that there are some challenges of reduction in trade and all those issues. So I do see that the investment is one aspect which Prime Minister may pitch in. It's both, it's domestic and the international capital, because unless you give a confidence about the ease of business to domestic, because even the international investors are going to come when the domestic industry is quite free, open to it and all. So I do think that is one, but I would also like to add that, India having a global entrepreneurship summit here last month, women and enterprise and women and entrepreneurship, because Modi, Prime Minister, always has these innovation things to talk about, and I think in Davos people talk about innovations and investment, and so I do believe that those things also PM will come out, because as he has been saying that India is a country of entrepreneurs and nation of entrepreneurs, and when we have so many young entrepreneurs with startup and all that, so I do think that, you know, having all this agenda, of course I know that we're bigger agenda, but for the youth and for women, how the investment is very important, and where I do see that role. If Prime Minister says that that will actually energize the younger population in this country, women entrepreneurs in this country, and those issues are equally important, because this year again I would repeat that the theme is very different at Davos,
right.
where these global leaders are talking about investing in fractured world. Right? So the fractured world in India is like, you know, India is now in. Yes.
Yes. Ms. Sinha, I have questions on the fractured world in India and women empowerment and the stupendous work that you are doing there. And I will come to all of that in just a bit. But I think you made a larger point about domestic industry versus what's happening overseas and how much foreign trade do you want to come in. Mr. Kanoria, Indian economy has seen some structural reforms like the GST. It has also seen, you know, the effects of demonetization, and both of these have been very, very disruptive. In fact, both of them have hurt growth, and on account of this, the numbers have been down. India is really no longer the fastest growing economy in the world. How exactly will the Prime Minister sell the growth potential, you know, keeping the fact that this happened on account of GST, this happened on his big gamble of demonetization, and we lost the coveted title of being the fastest growing economy in the world? How is he really going to balance out both arguments at Davos? I sometimes wonder how.
No, I think that it would be, the pitch should be not on what has happened in the past, because whether it was demonetization or the GST and other reform which has been brought in, some may have had a positive effect, some may have had a negative effect, but in the life of the country and the economy, things have to just move on. So all these things are behind, but looking in the future, looking ahead in the future, the opportunities in the country are just humongous, and that is what should be brought to light to the investors at the global arena, because you know, there is no doubt that India is a growing country, India is a growing population, India has the youth which is largest population of the world, which is young population in our country. So therefore, you know, everything is all the boxes, if you look at it, and if you have to tick for industries to invest in, this is the best opportunity and the best country to do so. And whatever has happened in the past, there may have been some learnings from there, but we have to move on. So I think that that should be the pitch, and that would definitely be the pitch, because Mr. Modi is can definitely market the country in the best possible manner.
All right. I think Sumant Sinha earlier today said that Mr. Modi needs to be the absolutely chief marketing officer at Davos. And Mr. Sinha, I'm going to come back to you. It's all very good to talk about the pitch that he will make or not make and all of that. The reality is that everything has to be driven to a cause, and that cause has to be to drive in investments. Do you believe that is going to happen? Do you believe Mr. Modi's visit will make a significant impact on investments that will begin to flow into the country?
You know, you can't, Supriya, use one event or one speech to point at and say whether that is going to be a trigger or not. I think investors are a little bit savvier than that. They're a little bit more long-term than that. I think they're going to look at not just the one speech, they're going to look at the body of work that the government is putting together. They will look at the long-term growth opportunities in the Indian market. And of course, they'll set it off against what are the growth opportunities in some of the other markets, and then they'll take a very rational decision as to whether it makes sense or not. I think in terms of Mr. Modi going out there and marketing India, I think that is something that he should do. It is important for him to narrate the work that he's done so far and what he intends to do in the future, because those are the kinds of things that people look at and then come to conclusions on in terms of their investment decisions. So I think it's an important speech, but it's not going to be the only thing that people focus on in terms of making the investment. As I said earlier also, I think there is one aspect of what he's going to do, which is to talk about India and be the marketer in chief. But the other aspect is also that he, I think, needs to position himself or would want to position himself in the global order in terms of what his beliefs are, where he stands. And I would hope that he does not do what Sadanand said, which is to pander to a domestic constituency. And I certainly don't, although I enjoyed the term that he used, corporate sycophants, but I certainly hope that he does not use the backdrop of that to position himself more to the domestic side, and really uses the opportunity to A, market India, and B, also make known what his actual philosophy is, what is his economic philosophy, because I don't think that's something that is really fully articulated. All of us have to read his actions, the tea leaves, come to our own suppositions as to what his true economic beliefs are. I think this is a good opportunity for him to talk about what he truly believes in.
Has been trying very hard for the last 3.5 years to articulate what the Prime Minister's real economic philosophy and policy is, and despite our many debates, we haven't been able to arrive at a consensus there. So I guess I'm going to cut him some slack there. But Sadanand, I must ask you that Mr. Modi, when he goes to market India at Davos, goes with a lot of ammunition. He does go with a lot of tools, whether it's World Bank ease of doing business, whether it is a Moody's upgrade, whether it is GST that he's laid out, his entire attempt at cleaning up the bank's balance sheet, the whole IBC amendments and all of that. But I think the three big things that the global investors are asking for are what's happening on labor, what's happening on land, and when are you going to do away with your fear, with your paranoia on FDI in defense. I think those are things that people will ask him on. Do you believe he can deliver promises on any of these?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that he does go in armed. He does have some heavy ammunition. But his heavy ammunition is not the, Moody's and ease of doing business and stuff like that. It's the fact that he is the prime minister of a very large economy, which despite the slowdown is growing at a reasonable rate. And if projections are to be believed, is going to become a larger and larger and more important market. And this is the most powerful prime minister in the last 35 years of this increasingly important economy. Of course, this would be true of anybody in his position, but that is a very strong card that he has. The fact that he's charismatic, the fact that he is comfortable around businessmen, that also helps. I think that the time for laying out his philosophy, frankly, would have been if he had gone to Davos in 2015. Now the problem with going out and laying out his philosophy, let's say he lays out a philosophy that sounds wonderful to the ears of everyone in Davos. He lays out the philosophy as a believer in markets and a believer in the invisible hand, a believer in business. The problem is that will now have to be measured against those 4 years, and many people will rightly be somewhat skeptical, particularly running into 2019. And so my point on this has long been that there's India's Davos man, but there's also another figure that we have to pay attention to, which is India's Gorakhpur man. I don't mean Yogi Adityanath. I mean that we have to pay attention to what Indian politicians say in their own language to their own people on the hustings, because in the end that matters much more than what the same person says in English at a place like Davos.
That's a very important point, and I'm going to take up that point in just a bit on the show. But Hemant Kanoni, I want to get one question out of the way, because I know we had this chat early on that India is willing to lay out the red carpet for global businesses. But as far as our own house is concerned, I think the government has decided that the rules of the game cannot continue. This chalta hai attitude to business, the usual tricks of trade can no longer be applied. In some sense, the way you do business in India has changed. And, I'm going to ask you, do you agree with me? Has it not certainly changed completely on how you operate in India, how you do business in India?
No, I think that, this is a very fair question, but at the same time, you may have a quarrel with your wife in the house, but you don't go out and talk about it. So similarly, I think that domestically we may have certain problems which we are definitely, the government is addressing it, the industries are trying to address it, the bankers are trying to address it. But we can't scare people from that particular, that they are having certain problems and all, and we are sorting it out. And I'm quite sanguine that we should be in a position to find solutions to many. Immediately, many solutions may take a little bit more time, because with the IBC, with the stressed assets which are there in the economy, some streamlining of the processes and regulations which has to take place. So all these are basically, and that will keep on happening. You see, I won't say that any country is perfect. Every country has its own problems. So I think that those problems will exist. But overall, if you look at it from the country's perspective, because of the huge opportunity which is there, so that should not get overwhelmed through the overshadowed by the problems that we have at home, some problems, because those problems will get addressed.
Glad at least you're being candid that there may be problems, and you know those problems have to be addressed. I'm glad at least you're being candid on that front. But Sumant Sinha, if I may bring this to you, and you know, just to take it away from Mr. Modi for a minute and ask on what is the expectation of Indian industry going to Davos? Look at the contingent that's going with about 100 odd CEOs there, some of the top marquee names. Private sector investment in India is at an all-time low. Many people believe that the rules of the game have changed. This whole act of cleaning up banks' balance sheets has really put a lot of corporates in line of fire as far as the government is concerned. What is the broad expectation that Indian industry has from the 48th summit of the World Economic Forum this year?
You know, Indian industry is not necessarily going to listen to the Indian government all the way to Davos. I think, you know, if you want to interact with the Indian government, we can very easily do so here in India. Of course, it will be interesting to you know, to hear what Mr. Modi has to say and what some of the other ministers accompanying him have to say. But I don't think it will be something that will be you know, very different from what we hear here. I think the reason that such a large number of Indian industrialists are going is because, you know, it's a great networking platform. You meet a lot of very interesting people. You know, you hear a lot of different insights. You hear what's happening in other parts of the world. And I think that's really the reason that most people tend to go. It's just, you know, so happens that Mr. Modi has decided to go this time, and that's terrific. But that's not the primary reason I would say that this Indian contingent would be going, or most of the CEOs would be going to Davos for.
I agree with you. I don't think the CEOs travel all the way and in such acute cold to listen to their own government. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room has to be with unemployment. And I'm going to take this across to Chetna Sinha. And Ms. Sinha, if I may just throw some numbers at you. It is widely anticipated that South Asia will add about 400,000 people to unemployment in 2018, and half of them will be in India. Given the government's poor track record, if I may, on adding employment, how is the Prime Minister going to convince a global audience on that? Do you believe that is going to be his Achilles heel? Will that be the red on his report card?
I believe that, you know, the whole thing also is that we have 90% of our economy and 90% of our population who are like small producers, farmers, entrepreneurs. They are in informal economy, and I do believe that with all the challenges, the country has started to get into the formal economy. And I think that is the time, this is the time where you can say that, you know, we are the country of entrepreneurs, we are the country of young startups, we are the country of women micro enterprise. And in India particularly, when you have a 20 billion, generally it is said that microfinance industry is $20 billion. Women, those who have taken finance from this sector, have graduated. They are coming forward. They are getting into the formal economy. I think that is the positive side to say that these entrepreneurs can create the jobs. I think what in Davos we are going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. What is the fourth industrial revolution? Not just, you know, having those big industries, but these entrepreneurs. And India is a techno savvy country. We have created so many e-platforms, and so all these startups, all these commercial entities are going to create the jobs. I do think that India has that example to show that at the global forum that, you know, these startups have been very much successful. And I again would also emphasize that I myself is going with the solutions, that I am myself launching an alternative investment fund there at Davos. The reason for micro women entrepreneurs, the reason is very simple, that, you know, after microfinance, women have graduated, they want to be to create the enterprise, and these enterprise needs investment, and it's both domestic and the international investors. And I would just like to add that India has been, I do believe that ease of doing business is very important in India when it comes to the investors. But still now, as we have got so many automatic route for coming the FDIs, and I see that why only big industries would have FDIs? Why can't impact investors come in India and invest? Why can't have a social impact bonds? Why can't we do our talking? And we have done that in education, in creating livelihood bonds and all that. So why can't we take those things on a global platform and get an investments? And if we do that way, then the job creation is not only centralized. These small enterprises also can create jobs, and those jobs. So India can be the nation of like all these entrepreneurs, and each entrepreneur can create hundreds of jobs also.
Okay.
I do believe that
the argument is really between job creators and job seekers, and I think you kind of put your finger on it. But if I may go across to both Sadanand Dume and Mr. Kanoria on this question, and this is a bit of a tricky question there, Mr. Kanoria, for you, because there are those out there who assert that India should engage with multilateral forums like WTO instead of wasting time at the World Economic Forum, that some of them choose to call circus of busy bodies. I mean, I don't know if I completely agree with this, but what's your take?
No, I think that both are important. World Economic Forum is a platform where all the industries and the global leaders are coming. So therefore, this is a very good platform to be in a position to highlight and market the country well, to be in a position to have one-to-one dialogues with companies who are wanting to come into India and who have certain issues or certain apprehensions. Those could be addressed. But at the other platform, that may not be the opportunity, because so therefore I think that different platforms have different significance and different opportunities. So therefore World Economic Forum, I would not say it's a circus, it's a good place to network, to know what is happening in the world. Like when we also go, we are trying to learn, because by the interactions, by attending the seminars and the workshops which are going on, panel discussions, and meeting various people from the global arena, we come to know what is happening globally, which is very important, because a business cannot be run in isolation. And as the businesses grow, it has to basically engage with what is happening globally, and then accordingly have a strategy.
Okay, it needs to have a strategy, but Sadanand, I'm going to come to you and I will ask you this question, A, on WTO versus World Economic Forum, and are you going to be as gloomy about the World Economic Forum? Because whatever you say, I think the fact that you get to meet a lot of people, you know, there's a very varied variety of people present there. There's a lot of exchange of dialogue that happens. I'm presuming that you're skeptical, but you aren't a naysayer altogether.
No, I'm not skeptical about attending. I don't think this is an either-or question at all. I mean, obviously, any government has to engage with the WTO process. And at the same time, I think it's good for the government to try and drum up investment for India and for Indian businesses to attend Davos. So, I mean, I think the premise that you can either do one or the other is flawed. So I have nothing against going to Davos. You know, my question is more fundamental, which is that what is being marketed? And what is the purpose of this visit? Is the purpose of this visit primarily to bring back investments to India, or is this purpose of this visit, is it sort of is it a bit of a marketing ploy to, burnish the Prime Minister's economic credentials at a time when, frankly, they've been hurting?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, and that's where the dichotomy is. But Chetna Sinha, I have about 6 odd minutes on this show, and I'm going to go across to you, Mr. Kanoria, and Sadanand Dume on this. The talk about in Davos this year is also about women empowerment. You look at the chair, it's 7 female members, which is all very good. How does India fare in that debate? How does India fare in that dialogue? Because yes, we are obsessed with growth. We want to be the fastest growing economy in the world. Yes, we want big trade, big investments to come in. But look at the plight of women in our country. And I know you work closely with a lot of them. And I'm not just referring to the economic plight, but the security, the crimes against women. I mean, where does that debate end up in Davos? And is that also going to be the uncomfortable questions that could be put forward to the Prime Minister? Usually they're not. Dignitaries are never asked uncomfortable questions. But could this be one of them? Because it's all about women at Davos this year.
Yeah, so I mean, it's when having a 7 women co-chair, which clearly indicates that world is thinking very sensitively on women's issues. Either it is safety, or it is ownership of businesses, or it is like basic rights. And so that actually indicates that globally also, it's not only just in India, but globally people are talking about she, we are for the she. So all these debates are there. And I do think that having 7 women co-chairs have clearly indicated that. So any head of the country is going to actually commit something, and I do believe that Prime Minister also will commit something on women empowerment. I'm not talking on the vague terms, but what I'm trying to say is that the participation of women in workforce and safety in small towns, particularly, like, because now India is in small town. You see so many girls going for higher education, and these girls, young girls, are actually looking at their powerful role, not just being a brides, like we say it, that it's now girls in India are not thinking about them as a brides, but also thinking about being an economic producer. So these issues are there, and I do believe that India has these programs also where Prime Minister may say that, you know, as far as Mudra is concerned, those where the banking with the women is concerned, those issues are very important. I mean, I've been like we have already seen that women have actually performed so well in microfinance, and they can perform if they get an opportunity of enterprise. If women comes in a mainstream, become a part of a formal economy, I do think that issues of safety and all can also be addressed.
No, I buy your point there, and I buy your point that because there is such emphasis and sensitivity on our gender, perhaps we will see commitments from all kinds of heads of state, and Mr. Modi perhaps will not be an exception there. But Mr. Karunia, women empowerment in our country is quite a concern, and I'll just throw a number at you. 12% of the entire Indian delegation comprises of women. That's it, just 12%. Compare that with the US, 27%. Of the entire delegation from the UK, 24% are women. In China, it's nearly 19%. Of our entire delegation that's going from India, only 12% women there. Women empowerment is a concern, is it not?
No, I think that India is one particular country where women have always been in power, starting from Indira Gandhi and many of the ministers, etc. So I think that the respect, the acknowledgement that woman power is very much recognized in the country is something I think that which is reflective and which is I would say that it is imbibed in all the people of the country. So I think that India very well can just not pontificate about women empowerment, but we have a lot of examples and it is continuously being practiced in the country. So this can be highlighted.
I'll have to ask a wrap question, and Sadanand, we'll let you have the last word on the show then. Mr. Modi has scored very high on various popularity surveys, whether it is the GAI that I just spoke about or the Pew survey. He's obviously scored very high. So his own personal popularity is still very high. He's the first Indian Prime Minister representing a majority government. Times have really changed for India from when Mr. Rao and Mr. Devagowda went last in 1997 to now. So this is a very different Prime Minister going from a very different country. But given his own popularity, do you believe at one level Modi at Davos overshadows India at Davos?
No, I think that, once you're outside India's borders, Modi at Davos and India at Davos, most people are looking at these as pretty much the same thing. They're not trying to make, do this artificial separation. And, to end on a slightly more positive note, I would say that he does have remarkable powers of persuasion. He's an extremely charismatic speaker. He's going to be backed up with a lot of high-powered corporate and government people. And so I think that, he'll probably come off well. What I would just urge your viewers to keep in mind is that this is just a conference, and that you have to separate the kind of natural hype and hoopla that surrounds these things with what actually happens on the ground. And our attention should be focused much more on the government's actual policies than on these sort of feel-good events.
I think you summed it up so beautifully that Modi at Davos, and once he's out of India's borders, is largely India at Davos. And I guess the euphoria, the hoopla will have to die down. And what he really tells the world about India will have to be focused and concentrated upon. But thank you very, very much for being a lovely panel right here on the India Development Debate. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. India is going to make a mega splash at Davos beginning Monday. We'll get you live interviews, updates, and a live handover from the event right there on the 48th World Economic Forum in Davos. Till we see you then, thank you very much for being with us this evening.